South African teams to leave Super Rugby and go to the Pro 14. I feel like I've heard this song before. Bit of deja vu. I'm sure I did a video on it. Yeah, it's reared its ugly head again. You may not think it's an ugly one if you're keen on the move, but this time it's Wales Online who have reported it. Now, I must say this is one that I kind of put in the grain of salt department because I'm not all that sure there's any foundation for this other than a bit of speculation. So I read the article from Wales Online talking about the South African teams perhaps heading to the Pro 14. And it seems to be largely based on the fact that here in New Zealand Rugby is going to do a review into like the viability of Super Rugby and what they can do to make it better and whatnot. So they're kind of taking that as the foundation that New Zealand wants to cut South Africa from Super Rugby. It's a bit of a leap for mine, but this is where Wales Online have gone with it. It was interesting as well because I did a bit of digging to see kind of what the New Zealand perspective is, what the South African perspective is, and I've had a bit of insight and feedback into this kind of thing before from a lot of you guys giving opinions and, like I said, a few insights as well. So the first kind of hurdle for this to happen, if it were to happen, is the broadcast deal. My understanding is SuperSport haven't yet finalised their deal with SANZAAR for Super Rugby going forward. Fox have reportedly pulled out with the Aussies, so that's still up in the air. But Sky Sport here in New Zealand has already signed off their deal with SANZAAR for, I forget how many years it is, but it's a kind of a long-term deal. So the money's kind of already in the bank for that one. So it's not that quick to just kind of untangle and say that, okay, sure, we're just going to cut ties with them. I don't think that's kind of the way that works. There would have to be a lot to be worked out in terms of the broadcast deal. I read another article in the New Zealand Herald which talked about the value of the broadcast deal and about how traditionally New Zealand and Australia don't bring as much to the table in terms of finances, and it's the South African deal that kind of props the two up. And this article from the New Zealand Herald, which again probably was going down that we don't need the South Africans route, it just seems to be a thing, I guess, when there's no rugby on, people like talking about this kind of stuff. But they basically said in that article that firstly, the New Zealand new deal with Sky Sports was largely bumped up on the previous one due to the fact that here in New Zealand we had generally Sky Sports has always been the broadcaster for Super Rugby, but at the previous World Cup Sky Sports lost the rights to a rival broadcaster called Spark Sport, and Sky had to really bump up their offer to get their latest deal done to make sure they kept Spark Sports' hands off that deal. So Sky were forced to put in a lot more money. That, combined with the fact that the Rand has lost value over time, means that, according to this article anyway in the Herald, that the New Zealand chunk of the pie is actually more sizable than it used to be. And it seems this article indicated to be the biggest portion. But yeah, I think that didn't take into account the fact that, or it did, but maybe it mentions that they also have to divvy some of that money up to the Mitre 10 Cup, whereas the Curry Cup's a separate deal. So it all gets a bit messy. But yeah, the broadcast deal thing is a thing, and I don't think it's a quick one to undo. If it were to happen, and like I say, I think it's a pretty big jump, that's going to make it a Pro 18. I mean, you guys will have to give me your insights. Any of you Cheetahs and Kings fans, how has it been in the Pro 14? Are you guys as pumped to see teams that you maybe weren't as familiar with a few years ago? Are you pumped to go and play Dragons or, I don't know, Edinburgh, Zebra? I'm not trying to rattle off bad teams, because I know Edinburgh's been pretty class. Zebra's been a bit ordinary. Dragons not been having their best time. Leinster, Ulster, like what is it like playing these guys compared to you were back in Super Rugby? And vice versa. How do Munster fans feel about the Kings coming to town? And that kind of thing. I'm not sure that there's that rivalry yet, but again, maybe that's just something that takes time. Also, I mean, the current format of the Pro 14 is to kind of cut the competition into two conferences, and they split the nations up, right? Like 2 Irish teams here, 2 Irish teams there, South African team here, South African team there. If you get to the point where it's a Pro 18, do you need to make it like a South African conference with 6 teams and then somehow rejig the rest of it to reduce the travel? Because, I mean, coming from a Super Rugby background, a big inflated 18 competition across multiple countries kind of didn't work that well for us. So I do worry a little bit for the Pro 14. I'm not trying to selfishly say, oh, we need to keep the South African teams here. Whatever's going to work for all parties works for me. But I do worry about an inflated competition. I did the video the other day about the stats. The Pro 14's attendance, it's a real mixed bag. Some teams get brilliant attendance, and some teams' attendance is shocking. Super Rugby is the same. So, yeah, I mean, if you brought in the big guns of South African rugby, I mean, like the Stormers who've got the World Player of the Year, have got the Springbok captain, is that going to be a bit more appetizing for existing Pro 14 fans? Probably. I know there was a bit of talk that we kind of sent them the dregs last time and that they didn't add any value, but anyway, I'll leave that for Pro 14 fans to decide. Also, from that attendances video, a fair few Pro 14 fans kind of crapped on their own competition, saying, we don't really care about that as much. It's mostly the Champions Cup that we're worried about. And the Champions Cup becomes another sticky equation because the South African teams don't currently qualify for the Champions Cup. They're not allowed in. Surely that would have to be the major carrot that could be dangled in terms of getting the South African teams in to Europe. Is the Pro 14 to be Pro 18? Is that enough? I don't know. Also, the fact that the seasons will be the wrong way around is also a sticking point for me as well. I know the time zones work way better, but playing rugby all throughout the summer, I guess it's not that different from the current format because we do start Super Rugby pretty early on in the year. How does that leave Australia, New Zealand, and Argentina? If it were to happen, and remember, this is so hypothetical, but I mean, potentially a New Zealand-Australian competition. I know there's talk about getting Japan in. I think that ship has sailed. I think Sanzar kind of mucked about with the Sunwolves, and they've kind of burned a wee bridge there with the JRFU, so I can't see anything happening with Japan personally. There's a lot of talk about trying to get the Pacific nations in. Again, it's the balance of the finances alongside the entertainment value. From the entertainment point of view, I don't think anyone would say no to having teams, either a team or teams from the Pacific in the competition. It's just, how's the broadcast deal going to work, man? How's the funding going to go? New Zealand's pretty small, so I don't know that we'd be able to properly run up. And Argentina seems to just be, everything I've read, kind of totally forgotten about. All those years trying to get Argentina into the Rugby Championship and Super Rugby, and at the minute, not really part of the conversation from what I hear. But like I said, all of this, from what I could read, I feel like it's mostly hot air. But if there is going to be a time for change, maybe the time of a global pandemic is going to be the time to get it done. Maybe Super Rugby Aotearoa kicks off and there's huge interest in it, and maybe they decide this is a better way to go and everyone amicably says, let's make a new plan. Or maybe things just keep trucking along until things kind of get back to normal and we go back to normal. We will have to wait and see. I think that's pretty much everything. Maybe like the only future, if you were going to change it, that could keep somehow things alive in terms of the current Super Rugby format, which I've seen suggested as well. Again, it takes someone smarter than me to work it out, but some kind of Champions League style competition where you save the travel, kind of like the Champions Cup. So you're saving it for the best of the best. You're not just making your bread and butter tournament one, which is all about, traveling around the world and playing teams. So maybe you should be saving that for the kind of elite games. I know Europe's got the Champions Cup, which kind of does the same thing, but again, it's not around the world, it's just in Europe. So, yeah, maybe that is a slightly more attractive prospect. Like the article from the Herald that I read mentioned, if they did limit it to kind of Australia and New Zealand, they would save a lot of money on travel, even if they lost out some of the money on the broadcast deal. But yeah, Like I said, I feel like it's probably mostly hot air, but we'll wait and see. Wales Online. You guys let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.